Hello and welcome again, guys, to the Betarians podcast. We're here with me, Joe, the Betarian. uh, I'm currently here with my usual crew, my usual gang, my posse. Uh, Alfie, aka Daddy Mothmaster, aka Legion.
Konnichiwa, weebs.
We're here with Alex, aka Obscuricon, aka Aspen,
Hey.
and we got the Sam Meister.
Heyo.
Today, we're actually going to be talking about something that we actually haven't spoken about before. No, that we haven't spoken about in a while, sorry, which is superpowers. We haven't spoken about it in a couple of weeks. But I think it's kind of important to go back to our roots and talk about special abilities and powers. Whether they're used in fiction, whether they're used in, mythology, whether they're used in games or any other type of media. And today, I thought this one would be kind of interesting. Time manipulation, because we spoke about it in the Speedster episode, and weirdly enough, we somehow got back to it on last week's episode, the episode of talking about prototype tropes. And I think this episode is going to be kind of interesting because we actually do have a person in the group right now who has actually used a character with time manipulation. Um, Alfie, you got to test the first ever proper playtest of a time child
I did.
in Anime Tales, and you actually probably know more about how the mechanics work than any of the other players. And as someone who designed it begrudgingly and also quite excitedly, it's kind of an interesting one to go by.
Yeah, we discovered very quickly that it can be, in certain situations, a very overpowered ability, but it's kind of
Yes.
tempered by the fact that it's an overpowered ability, but the person using it is still ostensibly, aside from stamina and vitality, or stamina and health increases, is
Yes.
ostensibly a human.
Yeah. So what we
Really.
actually wanted to talk about today was time manipulation. So one of the things I actually wanted to say about time manipulation for this particular session was actually, as an example, is that okay? So time manipulation. If you don't know anyone who's listening to this, obviously time manipulation is being able to either manipulate, control, or even travel through time. So say for instance, you've lived through all of your life. Imagine being able to go back to the point of which that you were younger, whether or even going into the future of when you're older, or going to the point of the past where you didn't exist yet, or going to the point of which that it was the end of your life. Any particular time of that, like everyone can also, look back at themselves like 10 years ago and go, man, if I met myself then, what would I say? So it's like, time manipulation again, similar to super strength and stuff like that. It's like, everyone wishes that they could do something different or turn back time or change something in the past or even being able to see what their future is like. And that's one of the things that I wanted to actually open up to this session more than any others, which is actually, although that this is a subject that I like to talk about, I actually was going to open it up more to the rest of you guys. So I mean, like, the only reason that I will say why it was chosen is I'll actually say that later on rather than at the beginning. So I'm going to say, if anyone has an example, we'll go through. So Alfie, we've already heard from you, but let's say Sam, do you have any examples of time manipulation that sort of like wowed you or interested you?
I mean, so many. So many to go through. I don't even know where to start, really. To be honest, I kind of wanted to mention Red Dwarf and their kind of interesting idea of time with the future echoes and the backwards universe.
Go on.
Where, well, in the book, and even in the TV show, if you ever seen it, there was an episode wherever they crossed dimensions to a dimension where time went backwards. So that every cause had an action. If you catch my meaning.
Yeah.
So whenever pretty much you didn't actually know what you ate, but it would come out of you and onto a plate.
It,
And when
it's so funny. Like,
Yeah.
That does.
they,
That does
it's like
remind
they
you would
make
me.
actually age,
go on.
and you would age backwards. Like in the book, they actually get stuck there for about. Dave Lister gets stuck there for about 60, actually about 50 years, and at that point he's become an old man, and he returns to the age of 16, as opposed to getting older, of course, because backwards logic.
I
And
love as well where like they make they make a fortune in the TV series Rimmer and and Crichton. They go back and they just do things normally like drinking water and everyone's like because in their world that's physically impossible.
I think
Yeah.
one of the things that I actually really enjoy about that is it reminds me a lot of Terry Pratchett. If anyone's ever read any of Terry Pratchett's Discworld novels, I think in Mort they actually kind of talk about a type of like seed, like this type of like crop that you wouldn't know how good the harvest was if you didn't pay attention to it last year, because you plant them for this year and then you get them last year. So it's that whole thing of like each time it's like, you get these crops and you have them and it's like, oh, okay, this year's going to be quite a good crop this year. Don't forget to put them in, and then that's when it happens, sort of thing. And that's kind of an interesting thing, but it's really kind of backwards and obviously illogical to us, but it's kind of like in a magical world, so it kind of makes sense and it works. But
so, what? But kind of, I can imagine like say you read a book, and say you began it, and there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. But imagine we saw it the other way round. But we could imagine say in the ending of Star Wars, we started off as say Luke Skywalker, and we saw everything go backwards. We'd be so confused as to why suddenly we're now in front of this random old guy fighting our father, who we don't actually know is their father at that point.
If I had to see Star Wars, the entire series, including the prequels and the sequels, from the ending backwards, I would have probably turned it off after 5 minutes. Last film was abysmal.
wow, that was quite an interesting way to do a cheap shot at the final film. Which
you got to do it when you.
I mean, fair enough, I guess so. We're now welcome, guys. We're now the anti-Star Wars gang. To anyone who hasn't been watching any of the Star Wars most recently, apparently, according to Alfie's opinion, don't watch them.
Thoughts and opinions of myself do not represent the brand or those associated with it.
No, it is not. Absolutely not. We are the
mine.
Betarians.
We are neutral.
We believe that your opinions matter to yourselves.
Yeah. We
They
have the
do,
deepest
they do very
respect
much
for
matter.
all
Yeah.
crackpot ideas.
We have the deepest respect for you and your opinions.
I would like. I would love
Yup,
to.
yup,
See,
yup, yup.
I would love to. I mean, to be fair, just going on a slight tangent there. I mean, speaking of Star Wars, that is another example of it. In the Clone Wars, slight spoilers for the very first bit of the original series of Clone Wars, they brought in a character called Ahsoka Tano, who people didn't really originally like on the whole, but then generally warmed up to, so much so that she's become a mainstay of the Star Wars, out of the film's canon.
Yes.
She became so popular that when she did, spoilers again for people who haven't seen the rest of this, when she did eventually die, as all Jedi essentially have to do in Star Wars, more or less, they then actually introduced the concept of time travel using the Force purely so that they could go back in time, save her from dying, and then delete time travel from Star Wars canon after doing that. Purely
Oh,
to save her.
Wow.
And
Oh,
that is how
Star
they moved
Wars.
it in.
And so
They literally made it up, and then they got rid of the character that made it up after saving her, so that it could never be brought up again to retcon anything.
I
in the
mean-
And
future.
that's
Which,
kind of one of the reasons as to why I wanted to talk about this subject. Time travel is one of the coolest abilities, but it's also one of the worst because sometimes it is just lazy hand writing for and insert best way to get rid of this problem here. And especially if it eats its own tail, and it's the way that we create this device is the exact way that we destroy it, so that then we can make something that we want. It's kind of like wish fulfillment. We use this time travel, we then get rid of this thing, and then we destroy the time travel device or the way to time travel, and then it's fine. It is basically the greatest MacGuffin, time travel. That's one of the reasons why I love and hate it, because time travel can be used really well if it's the main sort of it's the main story device, it's the main framing device for the story, but it's also one of the hardest bits to actually have to deal with if if it suddenly appears.
I mean, if anyone wants to see how difficult time travel can be, writing wise, and also if it was to be used kind of as quote unquote sort of realistically as possible, there's a film that was on Netflix called Primer that's a really low budget film, just about two guys who invent time travel essentially by strapping a microwave to a Tupperware box. And yeah, the whole film is sort of like Memento, where it starts kind of at the end, but then it's all out of order because it's meant to be one of them will go back in time to retcon something that'll then have a knock-on effect that then the other person has to go back in time to retcon that. Then that person goes forward in time to stop the other person from retconning it. And the whole film is kind of a cat and mouse that starts at the end. And then when you get to the very end of the film, which is the beginning of the plot line, it's like you actually see how they first ever meet and come up with the idea in the first place. It's a good film, but it's one of those films that you need to watch like twice, once all the way through, and then once again when you know the ending, so you can kind of see it both ways.
I mean,
But it's a good film.
it's kind of weird because I mean, like, time travel, as I said before, time travel can be used as either a story device or it can be used as a MacGuffin. Sometimes, though, I like that time travel is sort of like fragmented. Like, oh, there is people who can manipulate time, but only in small portions. Like, it's just a cool little effect to have like cool little abilities that no one's ever thought of. But Alex, do you have any examples for time travel?
Yeah, I do. One of my favorite ones is Max from Life is Strange, and I'm going to open with something, another kind of confession about my feelings on time travel. Time travel, I think it scares me. I like it. It is a scary power, really, and that's why I kind of like, you know, Max in Life is Strange is that she's just burgeoning her new powers and trying to make things right, but there are just some things that she cannot make right without horrific consequences, in other directions. Like, I mean, again, I don't really want to spoil it, but there is one character that she's very fond of, and she tries to right, something terrible that happened in their life, which changed them forever, and she does this, but the consequence of that is that her friend's life is just kind of ruined. Like she gets into a car crash and
Oh, I remember
it's a
episode
terrible.
4.
Yeah, and it's so
Goddamn
it's so,
feelings.
yeah, it's a real feel strain because it's like, oh my god, and it's like, she says, I never wanted this ever, and it's like, oh god, this is entirely my fault, and she has to write it, so it's like there's no way that she can write this situation other than like put it back to zero, and then she has to live with that knowledge of what she did, even though she retconned it. So I think that's actually a good way. It's like, yeah, it is like a MacGuffin power, but like it still has a downside. Like she has to deal with that horrific knowledge that she did put, her friend through this, in order to make it right, and it's now like basically just destroyed any way of like, writing the thing that happened in the back to
Even
just save her friend. It's
But it is
yeah,
like that,
and I
it
find
is
it
like that whole
scary.
great power, great responsibility thing. You use time or any powers correctly or incorrectly, there's still gonna be different consequences to them. Like for instance, like like with Superman, he's seen as this powerful being, and he's saving people using his incredible, immeasurable power. And eventually, people want to challenge that. People want to stop him because they're like, oh, at any moment he could just use this incredible power to, harm us. And so therefore people try and challenge him, people try and figure out ways to beat him and defeat him. And it's the exact same with time. Manipulating and messing with time will have different consequences on the future and even the current present that you live in, depending on how you've manipulated time. So it's that thing of like, everything will have a particular consequence, whether it's you mess with you mess with one pencil, and then because of that the entire day changes around you, and because of that someone then gets hit by a truck. Or you put this one particular situation to rights, someone is saved, but then later on that person who is saved then ultimately becomes the main bad guy, the main antagonist or something. It really just depends on how you change it. I think that's quite a good example, to be fair, because it's that whole
That happens in the
butterfly
game
effect.
Singularity.
Even the ending though involves, depending on what you do, involves really terrible time travel sadness.
Yeah.
I mean that's what I love about it, but also like it's a really cool power, but it's one that I would never want to actually exist in the real world because like it's just terrifying.
It's really ironic
this
because it's a power that I really would love to have, but it's also a power that I really wouldn't want to have. It's like that thing of, it's that 50-50 chance of, I think if someone came to me and said, by the way, I can give you powers over time, I'd have to say, Let me flip a coin for it, 50-50. Because I would prefer that something else has chosen that decision for me than I have chosen that decision. Because at the same time, as cool as I really want superpowers, knowing that the choice that I made ultimately could change the fates of everyone could be something that, that you'd have to live with. But at least knowing that there's a little bit of a extra bit of strange chance to it is actually...
Absolutely take that. I mean, like time, like it's one of the most versatile abilities that you can get because it's still kind of fair because it's like you yourself, you're not insanely overpowered, but it's like your ability gives you kind of almost infinite do-overs as well. And I mean, how you've done it in Animite Tales of it with the 3 different types of time children. Is it cool if I go on to that, or are we going to do that in another section?
We will in a second, because I actually have then a question for you guys. What questions do you have?
Oh gosh.
Oh, you guys go first before we go into the JoJo section of the podcast.
Oh, damn it! Actually, yeah, we'll come to you last because I actually want to talk about. I want to talk about something to do with that last because that's actually brilliant. So your question will be last. Alex, would you like to go first, or Sam, would you like to go first?
Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
No, you go first. Yeah.
We're all so polite.
Considering, as we've seen in many fantasies and science fiction, time travel, what are the laws of the time travel in the Betarian in Animite Tales? Because as we there's Back to the Future logic, there is Doctor Who logic, there's quantum leap logic, where time travel occurs, and they're all radically different from one another in their belief of what time travel can and will do.
Why, Sam, I'm so glad that you've asked this. Let me get out my 5-dimensional sheet as to how the timelines work in Animite Tales.
If you want, I can rephrase it.
The answer is actually any which way that they are supposedly chosen for the narrator. The actual lore is that there are meta beings. There are beings that are outside of the universe, or the universes or the multiverse, that are bigger than most of reality. So they actually have their own dimension that they exist outside of, and there are actually beings that are the living incarnations, or at least the conscious incarnations of those particular things, such as meta concepts, such as time. And if I am to actually go to a piece of artwork, we actually do have currently the only real proof of something to do with Tempest is his sign, his logo, the infinity symbol here. Again, thank you again, coming soon for this one. These 2 bits of art, you can actually now get these on t-shirts and stuff, which I'll actually put links in the description below later if anyone wants to actually have a look at those. But yes, basically, Tempest himself is actually the god over time. He resides over time itself. He has the ability of every conceivable which way, and he can manipulate time in any conceivable which way. His children, on the other hand, to make sure that his children don't mess with the fabric of all of time in one particular universe, he actually went for something that seems a little bit more irresponsible, but actually ultimately changes it anyway, which is the multiverse literally resides over the concept of different dimensions and then different time spaces. So in other words, there's an alternate universe where this Earth is, changed based off of the choices that we make. But then there's another universe where, literally that universe, its entire fluctuation of, the neutrons in the air and even, the electrons and the quarks, all change, so dynamically the planets and even reality is different. Whereas timelines are actually obviously based off of the universe has changed through the manipulation of time, rather than the universe was just born differently, or even just the universe is different in general. So it's that concept of time travel works in many different ways, as you've seen, backwards and forwards, but actually there is also sidewards and technically diagonally, which is you could go to another timeline where you either were never born, or another timeline where you became the most evil person on Earth, but it's still 2020, and that is sideways time travel. That's the time travel of going to another timeline, but in your current time stream. So at the exact point of time that you are currently now, but something else has happened, either in the past or something that's currently happening in the present that is different than the current situation that is happening now. And because of that, as we've seen with Rick and Morty, there are infinite possibilities, infinite timelines, infinite realities, infinite dimensions. So with time travel, it's dependent on each and every situation. Whether or not it's going back in time in this current timeline, going back going into the future, going into another timeline, going into another reality or another dimension. It's entirely down to either the powers, the gadgets, the tech, or even the narrator's choice. Because again, like if the DM or the narrator doesn't want to go like, okay, my players literally can now mess with all of the fabric of reality, and now my entire thing is changed, they can mess with it however they want. Oh, I just go back in time to stop this from ever happening. Cool, okay. Well, you do, but every other player is now left to their doom. But why? Like, if I change something in the past, yeah, no, you're going to a different timeline. Because you've now created an alternate timeline where you just disappear and the rest of them are left alone to kill the final boss. You, however, go into a timeline back in time where you defeat it, but you can never return to that timeline because technically to you, it's now locked off. So
Well,
really,
it's a win-win for me.
So it's really it's really a dependent.
So it's time travel as dimensional travel then?
It's ultimately down to however someone wants to do it, because time isn't one way. Time can work in any different ways. It's the way that I see it. It's the difference between the quantum realm and then the time stone itself. Like the difference between using the TARDIS and using the Speed Force. Each different ways of how you can access the manipulation of time depends on where you're gaining that access at the access point. Like for instance, like if I was to say like you're getting electricity from being shocked by a strike of lightning, or you're actually being electrocuted from a plug socket. Ultimately, you are being electrocuted, but which is the most dangerous one? It's the dependency of the volts. But it's also how rare either of those two occurrences are. And also the survivability. And that's the exact same thing with time travel. It's how rare, how difficult, and also how they mechanically work and alter the ways as to how you can move or manipulate through time. So yeah, super confusing, or as simplistic as you want / need it. That's how time travel works in Animite Tales. Like, if you are to manipulate time, it is to be exactly how it is needed to be, either for the audience to get it and understand it, or for the narrator to be able to balance the encounter of time travel.
I just go like that, like Bruce Willis in Looper, and just say, forget about it. Don't think about it. Just go with it.
So, Alex, do you have any questions?
Well, it's sort of. I was just, I kind of got my time travel scares out of the way a little bit, but I do wonder with like the Speed Force this is the thing with time travel, like, you can kind of access time travel through other powers as well, like Superman comes to mind. I mean, I know it's silly, it doesn't make any sense, but like spinning around the world.
That so much.
I mean, can I say can I say it's not actually meant to be that he's going around the world so fast that it reverses the world. It says going so fast that he actually breaks like the time, like the speed of light or something, so that he will be going backwards in time, and the fact that the Earth is moving backwards is meant to represent him moving backwards in time.
So he's accessing the Speed Force, kind of, I suppose.
No, because they
do
do confirm that certain forms of light can actually travel to different points. Technically, I guess theoretically, if something is moving at the speed of light, they can actually reach certain points in time. Like for instance, like we see a star. That star could have exploded millions of years ago, but because of the speed of light, we're seeing it way back in time. So technically, theoretically, we don't really know exactly how time properly moves, but technically you could do something similar to that. The only problem is that the only thing that we've actually found out is theoretically, if you actually were to move at the speed of light, instead of moving backwards, you'd actually be moving forwards in time. but who knows? We don't have the ability to move at the speed of light yet, so...
But in terms of superheroes, though, theoretically, if someone like had the ability to move at the speed of light, would they technically be time traveling, like just like going so fast they jump through centuries?
I mean, it would
Depend
really
on.
depend. Because, I mean, I would say no. Because, I mean, like, I would say that, like, no, you're just able to move so fast that it's, like, to certain people it's still in an instance. Because, I mean, if you think about it, even if you're moving at the speed of light, you are still moving at a speed. Light still travels at a certain distance, and putting it in a certain scenario, think about it this way. If you're on the ground and you see a car speeding past you at 100 miles an hour, that seems so fast. If you're up in the air and you see a car moving at 100 miles per hour, it seems so slow because of the distance that it has to travel. But then, if you then put a car speeding at 100 miles an hour and something speeding at, the speed of light, it's uncomparably faster. But then put it in space and you see how fast light travels, within like a light year. It takes a year for it to get to a certain point in a light year, because obviously, that's how it works. Light is traveling in a light year. It takes 1 year for it to reach this particular, speeding point, point in space, which basically means that, again, zoom out far enough distance and any speed looks really slow. So I mean, technically, like, moving at the speed of light on planet Earth, I don't think, no, it wouldn't allow you to time travel. It would allow you to get to places much insanely faster and possibly tear apart the world when you do so. But no, I don't think it would.
That's why if you were
Isn't it so
standing on a
much-
planet about 100 million light years away and saw Earth, you could literally still see dinosaurs walking around on Earth's surface.
Yeah.
Isn't it less moving at the speed of light, but moving faster than the speed of light that causes time craziness?
It's really like, honestly, it really depends, because I mean, we obviously don't really we have obviously that theoretical concept of tachyons, don't we? Like the theoretical concept of tachyons, particles that supposedly could move faster than the speed of light, and because of that, since we don't actually know or actually haven't been able to harness or get a hold of these theoretical objects or particles, we don't know, and because of that, until we know, it is all just a theory. So I mean,
Time theory.
oh no. But no, I think when it comes to superheroes, like, Alex, your question was, like, do you think other people could manipulate time? I think yes, in their own ways. Like, for instance, with the Superman thing, I mean, like, it would be like one of those things where it's like, again, a MacGuffin. But with the Speed Force, the way that they use time travel, and I'm so glad we get to talk about this a little bit. The way that they use the Speed Force is that they actually, at first, they state that because the Speed Force exists throughout all time and all dimensions, if you run through the Speed Force, you can then choose a point in time to then go back to, because the Speed Force exists throughout all of time. So because of it, you're then able to go into the Speed Force and jump back out. It's kind of like the idea of, I want to be on the other side of that lake, so jump into that lake and then swim through the lake, get onto the other side. That's exactly what the Speed Force does. It's basically the lake in between all of time, space, and reality. So that's how you're able to do it. By technicality, that just basically means that a person could actually just go into the Speed Force and teleport. Yeah. But that kind of concept of that's their power source, and it's also that. But then later on, they actually discover that the reason as to why that it originally allowed them to travel through time was not because that they were moving so fast or anything like that. It's because that the Speed Force, yes, does exist throughout all time and dimension, but it wasn't actually supposed to be something that you could do that with. It was actually because it was covering the Forever Force and all of the other different forces in the DC universe, which is actually the time travel force, which is then where we start getting really contrived, and it's really, really ridiculous.
So my brain starts hurting. The
Yeah.
continuity force.
Continuity!
Pretty much, I would say, down to they could make anything happen. Like, didn't Batman travel back in time when he exploded because of something?
I mean,
no, that happened to Superman, I think.
yeah,
when
I was
in
gonna say. I mean, I'm
cartoons
pretty
once
sure it was Superman.
with Toy Master.
All
He got
yes,
hit by a beam and then got teleported into the past? Or
I think it was the future, because
the future?
because he gets teleported into the future, and it turns out that he finds out that like about 2 weeks later, Vandal Savage is supposed to destroy the entire world because Superman isn't there to stop him, and then he destroys the entire world, and he's been there for like hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years, and he's like, I'm so bored, I'm immortal, and nothing is there to do anything, and then he was like, we're gonna build a time machine, and I want you to go back and stop me from destroying the world, and then he does it, and then it's like at the end of the episode, he then sees the entire planet is thriving again. I can't remember how he does it. I don't know if he actually does something to the Earth, the sun, to like make it red, and then everyone just dies of malnourishment, and the only one who's left to live is because that like Vandal Savage is immune to radiation or something like that. I can't remember how they do it.
Vandal Savage is just immortal. I think that's one of because he's back in the time of like Commandy. I'm not Commandy of the other like DC caveman.
Yeah, because
he's very like in the day.
There's many different versions of him where it states that he's either from the ancient Egyptian realm, like, or if that he's an actual caveman who gained powers from like the radiance of this thing, or it's actually magical means as to why he's like he's gained immortality. But I mean,
anyway,
either way. But yes, Alfie, any questions for you?
I'd quite like to know, considering we have got the 3 flavors of time children, what everyone would pick. So you have to pick a time child to play as, or B, what one would you pick? As we have Oracle, Stopper, and Remnant.
I suppose could you explain those?
Yes, I will explain those in terms that everyone will understand. JoJo terms.
Oh.
So no one will understand us at all, but
No.
So,
if you need subtitles, I'll bring them on.
Could you explain it in Greek mythological terms? Then I think we'd all get it.
Oh no.
So we have Oracle, which is essentially fast forward, and that is your King Crimson. So that is all about essentially existing in this time, but then also existing in a time sort of like a minute or so, or a few rotations or some time ahead of this as well. So if someone was to use this power of Oracle and then get killed, they would then essentially just skip the time that they were killed and appear a few minutes in the future. So that's all about seeing into the future and kind of being able to predict sort of people's moves based on other timelines and future outcomes. Then we've got Stopper, which is Zawaldo, which is more about stopping time, and it's more about sort of like stopping time either on all of time and you moving through it, or creating bubbles of stop time, or using your stop time effects to kind of like stop things like poisons and bleeding and things like that, like ailments. And then there's my personal favorite, your boy Legion,
as I've got here on the screen, Legie Boy.
Legie Boy, he is a remnant, otherwise kind of like Moody Blues, how he works, in a sense that he's all about rewinding time. So he's kind of like a human undo button. We've had him use things like rewind time to undo wounds and things like that on him and other people. Kind of like a medic, but not really. It's kind of like undoing the attacks. And then he also has something called Paradox, which is where he'll literally just deny an entire sort of like consequence of an action, but depending on the role, it'll be at a cost of like one of his stats going down by 1, as he's essentially taking the recoil of damaging the fabric of time himself by doing that. So I mean, I personally really like Remnant so far. I mean, I've tried Stopper and I've tried Remnant, and I'd quite like to try Oracle at some point as well.
Yeah, I mean, Bill tried Oracle at one point during one of the one shots that we did. It was like a bank heist, and he used Oracle. He had like super dexterity out the wazoo, and he had like quite a couple of minutes of time stopping, and because of that, he was actually able to stop time for 4 minutes, and then just grab the stuff that he needed and ran out of the bank, and still had enough time in his stop time to actually get to the getaway vehicle. But to everyone else, it's like he just teleported, and all of the like 30% of like all of the bank's stuff was gone. So I mean, like, that's kind of cool. I don't know personally which one I would, but what about you guys?
I'd say Stopper myself. I would love to try Stopper. I mean, I love Remnant because that paradox ability has been so useful in our campaigns, even if it has been at a cost, to the player and to
Yeah.
our sanity. But I like Stopper just because it's so useful. I like that idea. I mean, I don't know if anybody's seen Charmed, but that's one of the powers of the witches is just to create a time bubble, and so your enemies just stop immediately in the tracks. So you have time to think. It's like, okay, I'll just knock them out or whatever in a short amount of time. To me, it's just a short amount of time, and I could get to prepare, and then the battle begins. It's like I'm pretty much in control of the situation if the rolls get off. I would love to play as a Stopper.
I'd probably go for Stopper as well. Oracle, I wouldn't want to go for Oracle because I get like Doctor Manhattan vibes of seeing the future, and I don't really like the idea of knowing what's going to happen in the future. Even as good as that would be, I don't think I could handle that without, I don't think I could handle that well.
See,
Nor would I want the ability to travel back in time because that's too seductive a thing to have. That's something I would be tempted constantly to abuse. Because there's always micro moments that you think, oh god, I wish I said this, oh I wish I did that, oh I wish I did that. And to use like the quote from Star Trek: The Next Generation, the tapestry of my life, you pull at one thread and the tapestry falls apart.
Yeah.
I think
You pull it like little bits and pieces, suddenly there's nothing left of what you are after you keep going backwards.
it is one of those things where if you're able to control and manipulate everything of what you were before, are you even what you were at all? Like,
Exactly.
if you become what, if you change one thing or if you change everything. However, there is something quite interesting and quite unique to Time Children. They're entirely immune to the consequences of past actions. And the reason for this is because they do work under the sort of like the Avengers Endgame sort of time travel system, where because if they go back in time to try and affect something in their past, that then splinters off and that creates a new timeline. Because again, their future is going into the past, their past is now their future, so therefore they go back in time. They like say for instance, if they go back, like say for instance, if Legion went back in time 2 weeks ago, killed a 2 week version, like younger version of him, he wouldn't then die because he then creates a splinter in time where that group met a secondary Legion that then killed their Legion and then disappeared. So therefore, the original Legion, or the Legion who at least travelled back in time, wouldn't have any effect to him other than a little bit more blood on his hands or blood on his sword, or...
That's never stopped him before.
No, exactly. And that's
So
exactly...
reversal is less time travel, more dimensional travel then?
Sort of. You can still go back in
Timeline.
time, and you can still affect things that happened in your direct past, but ultimately you're only changing the future or the present of that other timeline. You're not changing your personal timeline. Like, remnants can go back in time, yes, but when they go to their present, they're going to their original present. So they couldn't go, like, say, for instance, oh no, my friend is dead, I'll go back in time and stop them from dying. No, but they could go back in time, grab a younger version of them, and bring them to their present time. Every time that they ever go back to a point in time and then come back to the present, it will always be from just a couple seconds after the portal closed when they left. So it'll be like, open, they leave, it closes, a new one opens as they come back out. Because there will always be that, defining moment of no matter what timeline you go back to, it will always be back to that exact moment.
So less Back to the Future logic then, where changing the past affects the present and the future.
Yes, because Time Children have to have this function in the lore of Anime Tales. They have to have this function, otherwise they literally wouldn't exist. Because if they were affected by the same rules of time travel as consequence meets actions, then their literal existence would be a paradox, and therefore they couldn't exist. Because if even one of them could go back in time to kill a past version of themselves, that then leads up to the possibility of, since all of them can go back in time, there's an infinite version of them that could go back in time, kill the version of them that then sort of like, that appeared, kill that, and then all of them die. In all of the future versions of themselves, they all die. So therefore, they had to have that thing where killing one of them or going back in time just technically either alters or opens the possibility up to a new timeline. If they change or do anything in that timeline, they then create a second or altering timeline. It's an interesting way of doing it, but yes, it is there just so that then they can't do the MacGuffin of like, don't worry guys, I've saved the entire group. Everyone's still dead in your timeline.
Actually, I realized they did that in Infamous.
Did they do that in Infamous?
Yeah, because the main baddie of Infamous is who's gone back in time to stop the Great Apocalypse by giving you your powers early, and he pretty much does try to kill you.
Oh,
But
okay.
you kill if any of you know that's that, or I've completed Infamous.
I will say one thing though. If I was to choose which out of these three that I got to play as, I would probably choose. I'm gonna have to go because no one else has chosen it. I'm gonna have to say Oracle. I love the ability to rewind time. I love the ability to stop time. But Oracles and Remnants still get the ability to stop time. Nowhere near as good as Stoppers. You know, they can't stop time in small bubbles. They can't stop time on objects or people or ailments or things like that. You know, they can't stop time on, you know, reactively, you know, like, etc. But Oracles do have higher capabilities of super dexterity. So that's a mechanical standpoint. But their ability to be able to jump forward into time and leave like a sort of a time remnant that, if dies, literally creates this kind of illusion of them dying. And then it's like, again, all they're doing is they're just skipping forward. It's that whole point of you are removing consequences from yourself. But even better is this concept of, if you can see into the future, fair enough, it's like, oh yeah, no, knowing the future kind of makes you dull. But maybe that could be kind of an interesting thing from a roleplay standpoint of like your character literally is just this unthinking, unfeeling character. Is like, I always know what the future is going to be. Nothing ever surprises me anymore. And maybe that whole thing of like, you know, you look into the future, but then someone then stops or alters something. Or even like, say for instance, like someone does something that they didn't foresee. And it's that whole thing of like, you didn't get to know that this was going to happen. It's like, maybe I was wrong. But even further,
like... yeah, sorry, go on.
would just be the fact that like I've already used a character like this before. Like I made a character just for Legion to fight called Skip Track, and the way that I used her abilities was I made an SPMA called Skip Track where she would roll for going into the future, but instead she would actually state something that was going to happen into the future and bring it to the next action. So she could either attack 2 turns. But the funny thing is unless if someone can actually understand or stop the usage of her time powers, she would always get the first hit landed, as long as she successfully got the roll for future attacks. I don't know, I kind of like that whole thing, like pulling things from the future or in a future timeline to the present now. I like that.
I was going to say that Skipjack was one of you know, our scariest antagonists in that journey, but not just, you know, because of her attitude as well of like, yeah, you know, I know that I'm going to win this fight. Like, I've actually seen me win this fight. Like, you have no chance. But, you know, also just that, you know, whole thing, like, yeah, she is going to get the first hit on you, you know, if you haven't nullified her.
Yeah.
And there's no way of nullifying her because she knows it's coming. So
She unceremoniously got killed in an elevator crash.
Yes, she did get killed in an elevator crash. Thank you again, my lovely partner Siobhan, for making Cosmos the pit-falling, like I want to say like tribal.
Is that actually canon? Is that for real canon? I didn't actually know that.
Yeah.
Like,
Didn't see
she
that
was one
coming,
of the
did
ones.
she?
No,
Yeah, you got it on.
But absolutely, yeah, no, that was actually canon. Yeah, she like when she used Pitfall, I rolled and I didn't tell anyone until like right at the end. But yeah, the person who got Pitfalled was Skip Track, which was a shame because I really love Skip Track. But I was like, I'm not gonna fudge these rolls. This, you know, I am a fair DM.
Sometimes.
Okay, yeah, no, I'm way too unfair. I let Aspen live 3 times when they should have died.
I mean, Cover, though.
And yeah,
Should've let
I
him
was
live.
I was so fair with Cover. To be fair, I was so fair. Like,
Could have been biased and let him live, but no.
I mean, you jumped out of a window. That was a choice, mate.
I mean, but it was 100 feet.
This is
More than
why-
one chance to. More
No.
one chance to try and do
It
that.
wasn't
why you
100
don't jump
feet.
out
It was
of
100
windows.
meters. There is a very big difference.
I
100
tried
meters
so
is still
hard.
fairly big.
100
tried
meters is
so hard.
massive. That's huge.
I know. So you should have had more than one chance to try and float.
Yeah, but you didn't. But anyway, my next thing is obviously we've had examples from everyone except from Alfie. What is your example that you want to bring to the table?
You know, I mean, there's always JoJo, but we've got that out of my system now. I kind of feel like the tingling has subsided.
Damn.
For the day, all I need to do now is do the Warhammer reference. I'll get it out there. I was actually going to use something that's not from either of those. It's a film. It's currently on Netflix by Makoto Shinkai. The film Your Name.
Ah.
Which is very much about that. I don't even think it's really spoilers to say because it's like it happens very, very early on, like in the film. But like, the whole film is kind of like a body swap. It's a male who lives in a city somewhere in Japan, and then there's a girl who lives like kind of in the more rural, sort of agricultural areas of Japan, and they swap bodies every sort of like other day, I believe. And you find out as it goes on that there's a dissonance between their timelines, and it turns out that they may or may not be either on the same timeline or in separate timelines, but they keep swapping. So technically moving forward and back in time, like simultaneously overnight. And I think it's a really interesting thing because they can never interact with each other directly. They leave each other notes, memento style, either written on their arm or leave to do letters and things like that. And it starts out being like a weird sort of Freaky Friday sort of scenario. But once they get more used to it, like the girl ends up kind of taking initiative with the guy's life and kind of sorting out sort of like his affairs and kind of getting him a date and things like that, stuff that he was more too socially awkward to do. But then the guy in the girl's sort of shoes would stop being so sort of awkward around her family and kind of like taking the initiative in her life as well and getting jobs done, things done around the community. And they kind of like dip into each other's lives that way, and that's quite a nice and kind of like unorthodox way to go about showing time manipulation in mainstream media. Because it's kind of all three of the separate powers of time at once, really.
Yeah. No, I like that.
I
mean,
smash, but I'd really recommend the film. It's a good film.
What's the name of the film again? Your Name.
It's called Your Name by Makoto Shinkai. It's on Netflix at the moment.
I will say one last thing before we go into the like final portion of this is how it can be used. Now, obviously, we've said like time travel devices, powers, going backwards, going forwards, going sideways. We've pretty much like covered almost everything. But there is one last thing that I actually like to do is talk about like the little finicky utility abilities, like the strange in and outs of how those powers can work in really odd ways, like. If a person can manipulate time, what can they do? Like, for instance, like immortality, agelessness. Those are the obvious ones. But I want to hear from you guys. What's a power that you've heard or even seen that uses time in some way that kind of is an interesting differentiation? It doesn't have to be something that is uncommon. It can be something that's commonly used, but we just haven't spoken about it. But yeah, I'd like to hear from you guys.
I keep thinking about that bit in Elder Scrolls where, you could have two timelines, and one where they forged a weapon, and another timeline where they don't have the materials, and you just take it from the other timeline, just that one object. Kind of the same with like Endgame in a way, because all of these, pieces of the Infinity Gauntlet, all of the Infinity Stones or whatever. But they're all been destroyed, so it seems hopeless. But you go into different times to get all of the components in order to get that. Like, you don't necessarily affect anything. You just take it from that particular time and then put it back, a second later. So that the timeline isn't disrupted, but you have the items there with you for this one particular task.
Yeah, it is about
like that.
taking something temporary, time borrowing.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I love that. I love that idea. I mean, yes, that still would probably mess with time, but it seems like you've got like the whole it's been technically it's only been gone for like a second, you know, uh, so it doesn't quite mess up time. You just pull out a weapon from a different timeline to bash someone in it, and then just lightly put it.
So what about
Yeah.
you, Sam?
I mean, there's the basic ones like stasis, freezing people in time, quickening or reversing aging, so that you turn people back into babies, or turn them to dust, like. But another example I was thinking was, which wouldn't really work with this system, was another Red Dwarf actually episode called the Inquisitor. If anyone's seen that,
No, I believe you've spoken about it before, but go on.
I think I have. It was about this droid that essentially goes about through time judging people to see if they had lived worthy lives, and if they had lived an unworthy life, he would essentially erase their existence in time, so that like one sperm went into a cell and that baby was born. He would change it so another sperm went into that cell and another baby was born, but they still existed, like the physical form existed in the present, and then he would destroy their physical form. So he'd pretty much alter time around that bit so that person no longer existed in that time stream.
Okay.
But their physical form remained.
See,
If you get that.
that's yeah. No, I kind of understand. It's like kind of like a time, like selective, like time copying, pasting, and editing sort of thing like that. Like taking this one thing, removing it, and changing or editing the way that another point in time was affected.
Like pretty much, having, like pretty much copying and pasting a different universe on top of our own.
Yes, yeah.
So he would remove, one Sam, but another Sam would appear right next to him. That was like a different person entirely. Had lived a completely different life because of that one choice of a different person being born. That was it.
Fair enough. What about you, Alfie? I know that you've got many different ones, but I'm sure there's got to be another time-based character who uses time in a very interesting way.
Yes, there is. There is. I was kind of caught between like Sandman, like the early Sandman DC comic, who kind of has prophetic dreams that allow him to sort of see crimes before they've happened. But there's also like kind of to expound on that. There's an entire series of books called the Time Wars. That my dad used to read like years and years ago. But like all of those are kind of about this agency, similar to the one in Time Shift, where all of their operatives are fitted with time traveling sort of equipment. And in that sort of future, warfare is pretty much nullified because the technological age is so high grade that everyone can just wipe themselves out like pretty much immediately. So the way that they fight wars is by sort of terrorist insurgencies will get or make their own time traveling equipment, go backwards or forwards in time to alter major events. So these guys have to basically go back to stop that from happening. And it's like really interesting because it starts out with sort of like a load of these guys going back in time, sort of like the medieval time, and kind of influencing some of the kingdoms there. And then the sort of guy, the protagonist, will then have to go back and kind of like convince kingdoms to side with them, and kind of they would then fight kind of with the weapons and things of that era. But it eventually kind of builds up to stuff like the other terrorist organization will go back in time to assassinate Hitler, and then sort of the protagonist would then have to go back and essentially protect Hitler from being assassinated. And it's like this cat and mouse thing where it's like you don't like both sides of the story there are kind of really in turmoil about whether or not what they're doing is the right thing. So obviously they don't want to be protecting Hitler, but like they're doing it because what if Hitler dies and then someone who's even worse takes over afterwards? Or what if that needed to happen to avert a catastrophe in the future, or to bring about some kind of like major technological development or something that's ended up being quite impactful and positive in timelines now. So I think I would have that in a way where it's like almost like a time detective, sort of like you can just kind of go back in time or forward in time to see the history of something, so you can then like solve crimes and things like that, and like right wrongs and that sort of thing.
Time detective.
Time cop.
Yeah, I mean, they even have that in Doctor Who with
Well, they
the
try
time
to
agency.
kill him.
Yes, although they
Wanna
never
kill
really
Hitler.
expand on it that much.
I mean, you say that, but they do in the role playing game.
Yeah,
I
this is the
mean,
problem because
yeah.
it seems like a MacGuffin when it's just sort of there, in the TV series. But then they expand on it in the universe. Like, okay, yeah, you got to read all these other books and then it will
Yeah.
make sense. It's like, yeah, well, I didn't know about any of that, and you never made it clear. And you're like, oh,
You just
I
have to
think-
be a bigger nerd than you already have been, you big nerd. It's like, no, I don't want to be a bigger nerd. And then you just start reading other comics
lore.
instead, and then forget about the other comics from some other series, and then, ah!
are we
Actually,
talking about
that's
Star
hilarious.
Wars again?
Just made me
mean-
think that that's
Include the
even
manga.
happened in Power Rangers.
I'm still annoyed that there was
They had a time
originally 7 canons for Star Wars, and that's not including the movies.
Yeah, absolutely. And most of that now has been nullified by Disney, but then also unnullified by them as well. Really
You know,
weird how
I
they've done
hate that even more because I mean, just say that you're nullifying it, you cowards. Like, don't
Yeah,
do the
literally.
second
Or
option
don't.
where it's like,
Or
yeah.
don't, who knows? Maybe that point there's 7 different universes of canon. It actually means that there's more creativity. Like with Animite Tales, there's one particular form as to how that we've made the fictional framing device, but there are different multiverses, different timelines, different operations of as to how the world works in that universe, and also different variants of things. So therefore, there is one big canon, but there can be multiple canons of those particular different universes. Because I mean, expanding on a universe where there is always a confirmation that there's something bigger out there.
And it just includes more people's like ideas and more sort of like, potential for stories rather than like just railroading it, saying, "Oh yeah, it was clones the whole time." It's like, no, that I'm okay. I don't like that.
I watched
I mean,
something
clones are
recently
now-
where that was the big twist, and I can't remember what it was.
You know what was the
yeah.
most pointless wars ever? The Clone Wars, because let's throw this generic CGI army against another generic CGI army. Cool. What are we gonna do? Watch as generic CGI armies fight each other. Let's
And they're
talk
all
about
Boba
politics.
They're all Boba Fett's as well.
Oh, but that's also describing like the first 2 Avengers films as well. Really.
I mean, it's
Ooh.
Shots
Throwing
fired.
down,
Technically-
throwing down the gauntlet there.
technically also the
Yeah.
4th Avengers movie. Oh yeah, and the 3rd event. Oh no, it's happening again. But yeah. So I mean, there's that. But what else was
Okay.
there? There was something else. One of my favourite abilities of time that someone has made like a really dumb ability of time, or at least a very small inkling of time, was that a person has this weird ability where they can, similar to how you said, like they can control whether or not something speeds up or slows down or rewinds aging. And there's actually two separate characters. There's one that is a character from One Piece, who I know that Sam will groan at, so that's good. Who has this
As I have.
weird aging power where they can age themselves forwards and backwards to make them look younger, older, and make people age, or make people younger. There's actually another power like that in a series which I know Coin has definitely talked to you about, Sam. Epithet Erased.
Oh,
Nope.
I've
Never
heard
heard
of
of
that.
it.
Yeah.
And Epithet Erased is basically it's kind of like stands, but also other particular types of things where it's like people have powers based off of a word that is imprinted onto their soul, and that word, depending on how they see that word can be used, is how they can manifest powers, like what they think of that word when it comes to them. And there's one like this guy who has this word called barrier, and all he has the ability to do is make and get rid of barriers. But like, what people don't realize is that if he actually had that ability, he could get rid of emotional as well as technically physical barriers, other than he creates these barriers that are very strong. But what would have been really brilliant is if he had the ability to what would have been really brilliant is if he had the ability to just get rid of walls, because they're technically barriers, blocking his path to get towards something. And it's like, no, he's really uncreative, so he only makes these energy shields, and that's it. And it's like, But then,
Ooh, what if you were born in that universe and you had the word "dummy thick" imprinted on your soul?
Well, there is one character.
There is
Well,
one-
not quite like that.
There is one
but,
character
you know.
who gets dumb, and her ability is to sort of dampen and nullify, and it's kind of a cool power. But my favourite one is Sun. Well, my favourite one is Sundial. I say that I actually do have another favourite, but we'll talk about this one. Sundial is actually where the user can turn back or forwards time on a particular object, or even imbue an object with that and then hit it. She can even stop a bullet in midair, and then she can then fire loads of bullets that are stopped in midair, and then let go of them all at once, and all of them hit the target, like a particular vampiric stand user, huh? But her ability, she has the ability to forward something to the point of which it turns into dust, and she has the other ability where she could rewind something back. But the downside is, if she rewinds back something to the point of which it unexists, or she forwards something to the point of the end of its time, she can't rewind it because it's now destroyed. It's no longer something that can be rewound. So that's kind of an interesting way of looking at the power. And I kind of like that, like weird and funny ways as to how you can manipulate time. But now we get into the final bit of this podcast. One of my favourite bits of the podcast in general is usually the questions, but this time, this is my favourite because it actually has a story. So, before, I'm going to just tell everyone what this last segment is, because obviously we usually say anyway. Can it be? Is it in? Does it work in? Could it work in? Anime Tales, the tabletop RPG that we are currently playtesting and developing. Now, before anyone answers that, I will say this. We already have said that there are testing characters who can manipulate time in some way, shape, or form. We've talked about, time children, so obviously we know that. But before we actually talk about how well it works, I am actually going to say 2 years ago, when I was making this, it came up to a point where I just said, time travel is not going to be a thing. If it is, it's only going to be a framing device for a campaign. It's never going to be wieldable. No one is ever going to have the powers of stopping or manipulating time. A year later, we did a session with Des, and I was like, okay, everyone just make up a character, and then we'll see how well we can do it from fiction. So Des comes up with Link, and from Legend of Zelda. Bill actually came up with Ishi Nashina from Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice, and then weirdly enough, my cousin Kane, he brought to the table Dio from
Oh my
JoJo's Bizarre
god.
Adventure,
Excellent.
and he was like, "Yeah, with the world," and I went, okay. So I spent a while figuring out exactly how it could work, and I was like, I really hate. I felt like Rick. I put that thing on the shelf. Why do we have to do time travel? Why do we have to do time powers? So I did it for a while, and I went, okay, so this is how it could work. And I came up with this, and it was, okay, so with time manipulation, we'll have it that to stop time, you have to roll a specific requirement. When the requirement is met, time is stopped, and only you can move in it. Whilst that's happening, you have your movement speed in-game. The distance that you move is cut by that point. So in other words, say for instance, like your character only has 15 meters that they can move per action. When you stop time, that means that you can't move 15 meters away from the place where you first stopped time. Because as soon as you start moving that much distance, time then resumes. Because again, it's that concept of you're now finally out of the range of it. You spent that time moving through it, and then it then went down to you're allowed 2 actions or 1 attack. So it was the concept of it was kind of like you had your own free movement. And you had your own free action, but when you attacked, it ended your turn because it was the whole thing of like you're stopping time, hitting them, and then as soon as you connect with something that is part of time, and you're trying to affect it by actually harming it in time, it then resumed time. I've said time way too many times in this podcast.
Time after
We've always got time for more time.
There's always time for more time, but we'll get time for that later. And so that's how it worked. And after the session, it was like, yeah, that was really overpowered. And I said, yeah, we're never going to use that again. Binned it for all of 2 days. And I was like, it works really well. I'll make an entire race about these. And that's how the Time Children came to be. And eventually, I made the 3 different variants: Remnant, Stopper, and Oracle. And I stated that time stopping will never be allowed to be used reactively unless if you choose that specialization of that character. Remnant, the ability for them to be able to reverse particular things but not be able to reverse all of time. And then Oracle's the ability for them to jump forward into the future by a few minutes and keep like a time clone of them that will do actions but can't attack because, again, consequences removed from them. And also see into the future. When all of these 3 were made, when all of the ability was done, I then looked back and I was like, man, I was really adamant for about 2 years on not having time manipulation or time powers in Animite Tales. I am glad that I sort of shed that, and that was exactly what happened. Like, I came to this realization that I wanted to see how it worked, and it did. And then, thankfully, because it worked well, I started doing it. So, as a player, Alfie, how well do you think that the time manipulation works? Like, given the height of the role requirements, given how well or how difficult it works, or even just like how powerful or underpowered it may or may not be.
I mean, I love the character and the power set is really cool. I think it really helped because when I first started. I mean, Legion was my first character as part of Animite Tales, and it was the first sort of like tabletop RPG that I've like, played in a while. But I think when I just met you again after school, like years later, and we were just in a bar, just like chucking character ideas around, and at the point I was really getting back into Devil May Cry 5, like when that came out. And I was like, I really kind of want to play as a character that's like Virgil, but not exactly like Virgil. And we kind of ended up just like throwing ideas around until brought up the topic of this new class that you come up with for the Omegans, and thus Legion was born. And he's kind of like he's very much developed a lot more since then as his own character, rather than being kind of like a Virgil clone. But like a lot of the powers there are kind of like more powerful in a way, because my original idea for it was that I wanted to be a character that was so fast and had like teleporting powers that he was like very hard to hit, but then he could also do really good like counter combos and things like that. So I think if I went for like an anomaly with like teleportation and like hyper agility, it still wouldn't be as powerful as how Legion is now, because he can literally just stop time and just attack people at his leisure, or do whatever he wants kind of at his leisure, as well as having the extra abilities for Remnant as well, which really work well. I think the role requirement for getting off your time manipulation, if someone didn't have the Chronorum, which really helps Legion by giving him an extra sort of +5 on his SP rolls, just for things that affect him only when he's holding it. I think if I didn't have that there as a time child, that ability, like the ability to stop time, wouldn't be nearly as sort of spammable almost.
Yeah.
Which is, and I kind of tried to get away from there with Legion, because I think when I first started it, when I was still kind of getting a feel for the character, I really understood like that sort of ability there. So I very much used that like all the time. Like it kind of became a meme at the time where it's like, okay, we start combat. It's like, great, I stop time immediately and then just start killing people. But
someone
but
coughs 2 blocks away. Time stop.
Yeah, time stop immediately. Just like, okay, we've got this really powerful boss. Cool, time stop combo dead. But and it's gonna become like a meme at this point. But like, I feel that like the more I've kind of got to play as him, he's less of a one-trick pony now and has a lot more up his sleeve. Like at the end of the campaign that we were playing with 8Cs, where we kind of left Legion and Co. Back there. By the end of that campaign, he still had a few tricks up his sleeve that no one had the opportunity to see at that point, because like they hadn't come up as a use. Because that was the thing, I kind of started like Batmaning it a little bit, kind of how I had the time stop and I had his katana prowess and his other sort of abilities there, but I started thinking like, but what if I came up against this enemy that my time stop wouldn't give me the edge over, either because they had some kind of immunity to physical damage or the damage output that I could deal, or if they had some sort of like, I don't know, like if they were a mimic or something like that. It's like, yeah, they're on fire, great, I stop time, good, but you're still going to get burned if you go near them. That's
You can't land a hit either because their body is not physical.
Exactly, yeah. So I started thinking about coming up with like various SPMAs and things like that to get around those bits. So he's still a character that has a lot more up his sleeve than what is kind of initially presented.
Yeah.
But I really like all the abilities that the remnants have.
And what about you two? I mean, you guys haven't played as it. I mean, I guess you've seen a couple of bits and pieces with time manipulation in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it almost works too well sometimes because it is just like, I mean, Omegans generally are just on another level of powers. I mean, there's a reason why we say no Omegans in some of our things because they are just like a new level of, or a new, and just up another power level, really, from the rest of the compendium.
They do have their own personal weaknesses, but
Oh,
yes,
yeah,
they
that's
do
true.
have abilities that kind of are on their own sort of level and sort of their own peak of they are the pinnacle sort of thing to some degree.
It makes sense though, given that they're pretty
yeah.
much kind of demigods in a way.
Yes, yeah, but they
Like
do,
Thor
yeah,
against Iron.
it's that kind of thing of the difference between sort of like, you know, like, oh, you have Wanda, who's kind of more like a, well, you know, kind of like a telekinetic and telepath. And then you then have, you know, Quicksilver, who's a speedster, and then you have then Thor, who's supposed to be like this like child of Odin and something. You know, it's that kind of like concept of how powerful he's supposed to be.
Yeah.
But I must say, it is kind of interesting as well. Like I mean, even in our own games, Legion, still failed quite a lot of roles sometimes just through like their own terrible decisions or through Temper saying no. I think probably one of the most affecting bits is when one of the times that Aspen died, and you weren't able to like
Yes.
reverse time.
Because I essentially
And-
beseeched the god of time himself, and he kind
And
of
he
just
said
went
no.
like, he left me on red, essentially.
So we had to create like another blood transfused thing that's forbidden item to get me done, which luckily was destroyed. But it's like, oh,
Even funnier though, it was just the fact that it was an item that again could not have been made if it weren't for the fact that it required another Omegan. It required to be blood transfused with an Animon child's blood, and then infused with a Time child's blood to be able to access reversal and then paradox. Later, only that character then destroyed those bands immediately after, and everyone was like, "Why did you do that?" It's like, because you were going to spam it. No, we weren't. What were you coming to tell me about? To tell you to give me the bands? Yeah, no, I made the right call.
I mean, yeah, that was like the main downside. Is like, yeah, good call. I mean, as a player, I'm like, no, we could do this for all kinds of things, but realistically, I would be like, yeah, you shouldn't let these insane imbeciles near any of that power.
What about you,
That's
Sam?
always the worry with time travel.
Yes,
There's
it
always
is.
going to be an Egypt with it.
There's one of you guys. I know you're gonna be stupid with it. What are you talking about? We're right now standing next to a dinosaur wearing a tutu.
Actually,
I mean,
that
if I had
was
power-
in one of those books with the butterfly effect in it, where they were. I think I said this last time. Ray Bradbury and the dinosaur and the butterfly.
Yes, in the
Yeah, I
Speedster
think I mentioned the
episode.
story last time. Yeah. See, we're talking back now.
Oh no, we're going back in time. Yes, and that's why Speedsters are so good, because they have the ability to just make us think about math, and that's probably why Alex isn't really a big fond person on Speedsters. Well, hang on a second.
But yes, time travel. OP.
OP.
Never let any, if you're going to DM this, never let them choose that as their powers. Well, too OP.
I don't know.
Don't be a legion.
I don't know. I personally, as a DM, I've had Legion in the campaign for many sessions, and I personally, yes, he does ruin a lot of the situations by going like, hang on a second, instant time stop dead. However,
I mean, that's usually done.
However,
So just
that was
something that
more
I-
my fault for not making certain encounters based off of the actual situation. Like, because you were very good against certain fights, but there were fights that you couldn't win. For instance, when you went up against 10, an Archling Husk who had super strength, super durability, and the capability of willpower, you then couldn't harm him at all. And
It's
even
like, yeah, I could stop him in time, but I only have a sword, and I'm very good with a sword, but there's only so much the sword can cut.
it's like the thing of like you could have all the time in the world, but if you can't, if the things that you can do can't break this item, there is no point in doing anything. And it was that thing of we even tested it later on where Legion had all of his equipment. He stopped time and he tried to attack 10 and it didn't work. We even had Ned Zed the Jester Mime with his alternate bending reality like reality bending abilities of mime, and he still couldn't beat him. And it's that thing of like there are certain characters who could, like Bill used Phyllis, and Phyllis actually did win, albeit that he had to blow himself up to do so, but he still beat him using his own abilities. And that is exactly it. Like that's the exact thing that I will hold to this game, which is even if there is an unfair advantage that a character may have because that their powers work better than someone else's, that doesn't make them unfairly unbeatable. Like almost no power, in fact, no power is unbeatable because obviously there's either nullification, figuring out special ways to implore into their weaknesses, and even there's just the good old-fashioned they will have a limitation. There's no way that a power will be able to keep being used forever because Legion, as you know, your powers work on the amount of time that you can stop time for. So
yeah, to cool down.
it's however many minutes that your biological form is able to stop time for, you then, when time resumes, can't stop time for that many minutes in game. And because of that, it's like, oh, I stop time for 2 minutes, walk up to them, 2 times my move speed, and then attack them. Then time resumes. You now can't use time stop for 2 whole rotations or 2 whole minutes, which in certain situations could be really dangerous because it's like, yes, I beat that character. Now the boss is here and I really wish I had the ability to stop time. And if they can beat you in 2 turns, you definitely needed it for that. And that's, I guess that's the whole point. It's just like certain encounters really base it off of that. And thanks to Legion, as well as Zinzarina, as well as Aspen, as well as every one of your characters that you guys have built and made, I have had the opportunity to be able to go, okay, I now know what I need to do here. And because of that, I was able to realise that bosses should not be capped at a certain amount of HP. They should have their own rules for HP, so that then like bosses actually have a certain level above the players that they can fight an entire group together and still make it feel and seem like that you're actually fighting a boss rather than fighting an enemy who's just going to get ganged on and kind of bullied by like 3 to 5 to 6 players. So I definitely say that, like, again, thank you for legioning.
Anytime, mate, anytime. I'm sure it's not the last one.
Probably not. But yeah, the one thing that I will say though is how it works in the lore of Animite Tales is that they don't stop time in the same way that you'd think. Like, when they stop time, what they do is they actually generate this sort of their own special energy, like this particular energy that their powers generate. And what they do is they actually phase through the dimension of time. So that's actually how they work. That's how they function. Their ability allows them to phase through time, so that then they're still operating in the same dimension because they're still in the physical realm, but their body is just able to just pass through the movement of the present, and because of that, that's how they're actually able to operate. And the reason as to why it's stated as in the terms of real minutes is because technically they are biologically still aging, still living. It's just that they're able to phase past the normal movement of time. And because of this, that's how it works. And that's also why time children have the weakness of, if currently grappled by another creature of time or of the present, they can't stop time whilst being grappled by such creatures. This is only because it would be incredibly overpowered if you were able to stop time whilst something was holding on to you and be like, yeah, you got nothing else to do. But also it's because we added this because, to be honest, Time Children already are overpowered enough. And we wanted something to actually give them some sort of a weakness. But it also operates as a mechanic, because then when they blood transfuse items and clothing and weapons and give them to their teammates, it then means that if they're held by their teammates whilst they're wearing this stuff, they can then stop time or manipulate time with them held onto them, so that then they can all pass through time. And that's really how it works lore-wise and mechanical. So that's pretty much it, to be fair. That's it, unless if anyone else has anything else to say about time manipulation or how it's worked, or could it be changed, or could it be any better or any different in Animite Tales?
I mean, I would say, like with all the other abilities that we talked about, but we could just do that with SPMAs or unique attributes, I suppose, with like getting items and such, or body swapping and all that sort of thing.
Yeah. Different ways as to how you could use and alter your powers. At some point we'll have to talk about unique attributes at some point. But until then, again, thank you everyone for coming along to this podcast. This podcast has obviously been for time manipulation and time powers. Again, this is the Betarians. Thank you very much everyone for joining us. Again, thank you guys. You have always been so brilliant in these podcasts.
Oh, shucks.
Oh, we try.
Oh, really? You try? Oh, damn.
See, that was the thing. You weren't trying. That was the problem.
So I guess the last thing is, does anyone have any particular? I'm gonna say Alfie. We'll go for you this time.
Yes.
Do you have any powers that you want to discuss next week?
Ooh, I mean, on the topic of Omegans, I'd quite like to discuss powers that deal with sort of like negative space and darkness. Kind of like spatial, I guess, would be a good one.
Okay.
That'd be quite a fun one to use. Because, I mean, that's very much like reality warping and sort of like bending, like spatial sort of distortions and things.
So like physical manipulation. It's kind of like the ability to manipulate the physical form of the realm around them. Or are you actually talking of all spatial abilities?
I'm talking more about like the uses of pretty much all spatial abilities, like how they can all sort of be used. Because I mean, you can do spatial abilities to like open portals from one area to another, or you could also just rip someone's atoms apart, or change the world around you.
Then in that case, next week we'll be talking about spatial.
I mean, it makes sense. We're going through the TARDIS now.
Yeah.
Immunize dimensions.
Time.
Spatial
and
manipulation, time manipulation. I mean, it's all coming together, guys. I mean, we have done it.
Relative dimensions in space.
We have done it exactly as we needed to do: time and space.
Exactly. What next we need to talk about is dimensions and and then we'll have the whole thing.
And relativity.
Oh, no.
And then polymorphs.
Well, these topics are relative to the game.
I mean,
Yeah.
fair enough. In that case, then, guys, again, thank you. And next week we'll be talking about spatial manipulation. So thanks again. See you next time.
Bye, guys.
See you in the future.
See you later, y'all. Ho, ho, ho! Have fun editing that.